Hi, everyone. Hey, Rickard, how are you going?
Oh, hi, Danielle. Yeah, good, thanks.
Nice to see you. It's been a while.
Absolutely. No, it's good. I'm happy we get
Yeah.
together to do this. Was it February we did one, right?
Yes, that's right. We had a forum. Yeah, yeah. It's always good to get online and have a chat about these very important things. So, welcome everybody. For everyone who's joining us live on Zoom, it's fantastic to see you all here. My name is Danielle Stein Fairhurst. I'm a financial modelling specialist, and I'm very pleased to welcome today our special guest, Rickard Wärnelid. He is a partner at Mazars. We first met when Rickard was in Sydney, where you've been for many years, where you were the founder and CEO of Corality Financial Group, which was acquired by Mazars a couple of years ago, and you've been in Europe pretty much ever since, haven't you?
Yeah, not quite, but most of that is right.
Yeah.
I was so Mazars acquired Quality in 2016. So it's been, believe it or not, it's almost been 5 years now.
Yeah. So
And
didn't you go to Europe straight away as soon as it was
No, I
acquired?
didn't. I didn't. A lot of people think that was the case, but
Ah.
I moved to Europe, to Stockholm, actually in 2019. So it's coming up to 2 years.
Wow. And you've
Since
ended
that.
up being there a little bit longer than you planned. Is
That's
that
right.
right?
Yeah, I should have been back by now, but this thing
So,
called COVID that South
yeah.
Australians haven't really heard of.
When are
Um,
we going to get you back in Sydney? Looking forward
the
to.
current plan is to around mid-August to go back. We just need
Ah.
to, I'd like to ask everyone on the all the participants to help make Singapore Airlines stick to the promises and actually.
Have you got flights and you've just had to
Well, it
postpone
doesn't.
them?
Well, getting tickets is not hard. Getting tickets on the flight that actually departs, that's a little bit harder.
Yeah.
But anyway, August is the plan. I was meant to go back in December, but
Mm.
it just wasn't a good time in the
Yeah.
world to move around the world. So hopefully, 1st of September, I'll actually be in an office for the first time in a year and a half. So
You look like you're in an office right now. Ah, no, is that a
yeah, that's
personal
right.
background?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so for everybody who's joining us here on Zoom today, we are recording. We are also streaming live on YouTube. So if you are joining us live on Zoom, feel free to put a comment in the chat. This is going to be a pretty casual discussion. So Rickard and I are just going to have a chat about our favourite topic, financial modelling. So do feel free to participate in the conversation as much as you can via the chat. You'll also notice there's a Q&A section at the bottom. So any sort of more involved questions you can pop in the Q&A and I will interrupt. We'll sort of interrupt our discussion and try to sort of participate in what you've been asking. And if you're joining us on YouTube, you can also put comments on there as well. So do feel free to ask questions about what we're talking about. Today is really about the different types of models. If you've been doing financial modelling for any period of time, you'll realise that there's so many different types of financial models that you build. And people often ask me, hey, can I have a financial model for this? Or can I have a financial model for that? And they think that I can just pull a model out of a box and give it to them straight like that. And it doesn't really work like that. There's so many different types of models. And that's what we're really going to delve into today with Rickard. And yeah, so Rickard, you've got a couple of different types of models that we're going to cover off. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite important to understand sort of the background of this topic, which is, I mean, what we see, Danielle, clearly, and we see it every day, is this unnecessary tension between, is this right? Is that wrong? Why do they do that? Why do they speak like that? And just, I suppose, trying to understand a little bit more what drives those types of conversation. Because I don't think, oftentimes, it doesn't help anyone. It just drives, it becomes technical conversations. But so we're trying to sort of take a step behind those discussions to understand why do people have such strong different opinions about basically fundamental parts around financial modeling. But we're taking a step away from basically Excel or spreadsheets and how about away from functions and formatting and model architecture and that, and
You
look at.
must always do it like this. You must always put your
Yeah, that's
notes
right. I
on,
mean,
that kind of
it
thing.
gets, uh, you can say those things in a very well-defined environment. I mean, most of the work that I do would be in, I suppose people would typically classify it as project finance. So you say, well, there's going to be an investment or a lending case. It's going to have a time horizon of like 30 years. The audience will be banks and advisors and investors. We need a certain level of accuracy. It's going to be driver-based. It's going to have a tax regime and covenants, etc. So you're already closing out, 99.9% of all options in the world and saying, this is the world. So if someone says, I want a typical model with those parameters, I'll say, yeah, that's cool. But if someone wants, which is very common, going back to your point, could I just have a typical model or standard model in, a treasury model for retail with Hungarian tax and a cross-border FX currency swap? No.
Surely you've just got one of those in your back pocket, yeah?
That's what I mean, yeah. So it gets a bit tricky to say what are these real things. So what I was thinking we could do today is I've grouped together about 4 fundamental topics that needs to be considered before we get on to what are we actually trying to do. But starting out, I think we started, just to get a feel for who's on the call and what people do, we put together a list of, I suppose, like a standard representation of typical models or typical areas of financial modeling. And it would be quite interesting to understand where people would nominate themselves. And there's no right or wrong. You're not going to get a marked up score on this. But these things will then, the reality is that most people work across sectors and there's different ways of slicing it, but just getting a feel for it is quite interesting.
For those people on Zoom, you'll see a little poll has popped up and you can actually have multiple answers. So we just want to get a bit of an idea of the different types of.
And look, if we were to have breakout rooms and discussions in this, I would probably suggest that we slice it by this category. Because typically you get people who nominate themselves into the same bucket here would probably make better friends in a financial modeling context. So, you get, for example, you get startup people, mixing them with, say, equity research people. It's very different, the fundamental drivers of what a model is meant to do. It doesn't align so well. And private equity, of course, typically operates with very mature, large-scale assets that you're trying to delist and do analysis on. They don't go so well with project finance in a driver-based assumption and much lower margins, looking at downside instead of upside, and that sort of thing. So slicing it that way makes for quite an interesting point. So not sure on the poll, Danielle, do you see any particular trends worth commenting on?
Yeah, let's have a look and see what people have said. So we can see here that the majority of people on the call today are working on operational models, but only by a very slim margin. There's a lot of people working in FP&A, project finance, investments. Project feasibility also had quite a lot, perhaps a little less in startups, equity research, private equity, and a couple of people said they don't do any modelling just yet. So that's interesting to see.
I think interestingly, which was I suppose the one of the many backgrounds for having this type of policy, you add up the percentages of people, it adds up to, I estimate, about 300% of people.
Yeah, but we have multiple answers.
Yeah, that's right. But that's common, right? It's unusual that people say, I'm just in this bucket.
Exactly.
But we come to this a bit later, but one model needs to be for a specific purpose. You can do it for multiple purposes, but you need to be aware of that there's a compromise in functionality and satisfaction of the end users. The tighter you get in your definition, the happier those specific people and that specific audience will get. Once you soften the borders or the boundaries of what you're trying to do, you might have something that's somewhat suitable for a broader range of people, but they may not be as satisfied as a very specific purpose.
And this is where which we can really run into problems, is where you build a model for a particular purpose and then you end up using it for something else. And I often see errors like that. You might just do a really quick sort of, project visibility or something like that, and you put it together. And then you somebody says, oh, where's that model? Let's kind of, and you end up making it more detailed. And then you want to do a forecast and you sort of put a bit more on there. And then budget time rolls around and you end up, building a full scale model that was based on some of the assumptions and the drivers that you never intended to be used for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, I mean, you mentioned it's already, Danielle, but for anyone who's on the call in the Zoom, in the live version, feel free to put in your comments. And if you've got any questions, we'll go through the full foundation bits, but we've got a few other, I suppose, side topics that we want to drill into after, and we can easily swap those around or add something else to it. So
we're happy to. We're very easily distracted, so feel free to pop any comments or anything any sort of direction you'd like us to go in as we go.
Yeah. But then kicking off and looking at the first category, I suppose the big driver in this topic, really, I can put that down to one fundamental question, which is: are you using a model to actually work out where you are going, or are you using the model to validate a strategy or an outcome that you've already decided on? Right? This is it takes some honesty to answer this question, but most people have been there. Someone says the equity value of this asset is $100 million. And then someone says, all right, well, clearly that's my job to produce a model that achieves that, And sometimes that's the right thing to do. And sometimes that's certainly not the right thing to do. But being honest about what you are doing is that's absolutely important. And you can look at this difference from like if you look at startups, for example. I mean, I get more questions from startup modelers than I get from other areas, if I exclude my normal day-to-day professional product finance, where we, as a business, respond to people's questions around product finance modeling. But in startups, people say, what should I include in the startup model? And often it comes back to the point of, well, if you're building a unicorn, you got to start with your known assumption in your model has to be a valuation of $1 billion. All right? There's no point in doing a driver-based analysis unless you get into your objective. So then you're starting with the result, effectively, and saying, what sort of subscription base do I need? Or what's the revenue model that I need? And then sort of work your way towards an outcome so that you say, well, to get there, I need to get to this. That's quite different to many other parts of modeling. But anyway, answering that question and saying, I mean, for example, we see this often in interdepartmental analysis, for example, in large organizations. Very often you'll say, I've been given some key metrics for this asset or for this department. That's the budget for next year or for the coming 5 years. Now I've been asked to build a model to represent that. Okay. That's very different to doing greenfield gold mine in the Philippines when you say, I just don't know where I'm going, right? Which is going to be driving technical analysis and gold prices and lots of different things. So I'm assuming you have quite a strong background in, I suppose, FP&A, planning, budgeting, Danielle. Do you see this conflict as clearly as I do, or would you have any different perspectives on that?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's I think you really got to know where you're going with the model. Like what is the purpose? If you don't know the reason that you're putting it together and what the outcome is going to be, it does get quite difficult. And you sort of have that tongue-in-cheek thing where you ask the client, well, what number would you like it to be? But of course, you can't say that. But often people have in their mind exactly what the model is going to tell them, and they really just want you to tell them that they should go ahead with this brilliant project because, of course, it's brilliant because it's their idea. That sort of.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes this concept breaks down completely, right? If you look at you try to build an equity research model for Tesla at the moment, you can build up any model you like, and then the outcome you get, you need to multiply it by 20, just because that's where the market's at.
Just because.
So, what are you going to do? This is the market, this is the world, this is what people think it's going to be worth, and this. But you see this discoupling from reality to where we're at, but it's built on just belief, right? So how do you manage that in a model? You can't you can build a model and say, I think Tesla should be worth 20 times less than it is today. All right, well, it's going to knock you out of a lot of equity transactions. It may not be good business, but it could be good business. So it's quite a fundamental question on where you want things to go. But look, it's once you come to that purpose part, and whether you know where you're going, or if you're trying to work it out. The second question, which is again fundamental in taking things forward, and goes back to those categories we looked at before, is who are the uses of the model once it's been built? First step is, are they internal or also external? That's a huge step. And the second one is, are there more than one person who can drive the model or even use the model or modify the model? And it goes all the way from, if you look at, say, like a private equity model, for example, or project finance, they're typically owned primarily by one person, which means numbers will flow into it and outputs will come out, but the model is owned by one person who says, I know everything that's going on in this model. That's typically the case until this person leaves and someone else picks it up.
Not a good situation to be in, is it? But it's often the case.
Yeah. I mean, the reality is that you end up in a situation where no one will say, I know what's happening in this model, which is pretty scary.
We just put numbers in and numbers come out and nobody really understands how. And that's really scary. Yeah,
that can drive a lot of stress, particularly in the new person coming into a new environment and saying, I just don't know what's been going on. Or even worse, I know what's going on and I know it's wrong. That's not a good place to be. No. But anyway, look at this. If you drill it down, the first step is this model going to leave my organization? Right? If you do that, you got to say, well, am I comfortable in sharing assumptions that are in there? And with whom? And what does that mean? I mean, if you're in a listed environment, there can be regulatory rules for you not being able to do so, because it can be it's basically insider information that you're sharing to other people. So you need to protect that very clearly. Of course, that can all be sorted, but it's a different level of, you need a certain level of trust and you need a certain level of legal protection for what information is shared with.
But that's quite critical, right from the start. Is this an internal model or is it an external model? And that's
right. Yeah. Important. So first step is from one person to other people in an organization, which is, that's difficult as it is. Next step is, do I go out? And that's still, we're only talking about sharing information at that stage. If you then take that one step forward and say, well, I want other people to use the model, enter information, or possibly even modify it. For example, I run a global team, and we need to collect information from my offices in Sydney, Toronto, London, Delhi, and Sydney, right? There's two ways I can choose to do that. Either I say, please send me spreadsheets, and I'll copy paste information from there, and I'll put it into my thing so I know what's going on. Look, I'm not very patient with wasting time on administration, so I just don't like that approach. So I'd say, all right, here's a file. I'd like to see this update. Usually that's not a problem. And then, with our teams and, global service and that, this is not a problem. It used to be a big technical problem to do that, say 10 years ago, but now that's easy. But if someone then says, I don't like the structure on my specific part of this model, can I change it? All right. You got to choose then. Are other people allowed to change things in their bit? Which basically means you don't have full control. So that if things break, it may be someone else's fault, and you may not know exactly who's done what or why. And sure, as an MVP, Danielle, you know that like Excel tracking is coming and there's ways of getting around that, and it's coming, but it's not working. Like in organizational setting, we're not there. So things may happen, and suddenly you open your dashboard, your global dashboard, and go, I can't say why, I just know that this is wrong. All right. And then
version control has always been a huge issue, being able to see what,
That's right. It's a price we pay for flexibility, right?
Yeah.
The alternative is to say, I'm just putting in a global budgeting software that's strict and planned and all that. And then suddenly other things get a lot harder. So we need to pick this balance. But that sharing, non-sharing, who are the authors and who can do what, is something you need to be crystal clear about that when you're designing that first model, or things just go wrong.
Yeah, and don't have something that's, designed, it's got stuff in that you haven't disclosed to anyone else, and then it ends up being made public. The other thing I think that's kind of interesting is who, like you said, I think you said initially, was who's actually got control of the model. And I, as a consultant, I work on a lot of projects where I don't want to be the person in control. I build a model that I want the client to take over. And I was having a conversation with another person the other day who build models that that they control as a consultant, and they're sort of much bigger projects, so that the model is still controlled by the consultant. And if the client wants any changes, they have to come back to them and do that. So is that how does Mazars work in that way? Do you, as a small
look, it's similar. It just depends on the organization. I mean, we have certain mandates where we actually own and manage and run the model.
Yeah.
So we say, look, for the next 2 years, we're going to update this model based on assumptions. We're going to make sure it's tight and everything else. But that requires ongoing attention and control, as you say, which has got some benefits and other disadvantages.
That's an agreement up front, yeah?
Yeah, that's right, yeah. But that's not, I mean, it's not too different on, it has the same challenges as in someone internal owning the model, because it's the same challenge. It's just another individual doing it. Technology now allows for that information sharing to happen, whether you're a full-time employee, you're a part-time contractor, or if you're an outsourced professional services provider. It doesn't really change. The question is one person or multiple people? And need to come back to doing this.
But I guess I always try to make sure that the client is in control, or the person using the model is across all of this, so it becomes their model, I suppose. Because I'm fairly, just as a small independent consultant, I don't have that sort of bandwidth for people to be coming back to me every 5 minutes when they want something to change. So I try to sort of push all the responsibility onto the client. So I build the model and then I hand it over and I say, there you go, that's your model. And and it's almost becomes like a training as well, so that they have, and to try to make sure that they have the skills to be able to make changes going forward. And they appreciate that you can't just change the structure. You need to update it carefully.
Yeah, look, there's a balance there. And look, we just had a question in the chat, which what if they don't have the skills? And this is, if you look at a ramp up stage of business, you can call that in a startup, for example. You often see this, or more typically in like a large scale. Let's talk about large scale infrastructure energy project, for example, which is, I mean, that's my bread and butter, I suppose. But let's say someone says, I'm going to build a recycling plant for Tesla batteries. Okay, who's in the team at the moment? All right, that would be me. Okay. You're going to build the model? No. I don't build models. Okay, all right. So someone's got to build the model. Yeah, can you build the model? Yeah, we can build a model. All right. And then can we hand it back to you? No, I don't. No, I don't want it. Can you drive it? Okay, that's cool. But then there's that transition phase, which is like 5 years later, or 2 years later, 1 year later. There's going to be a CFO. There's going to be 2 people in the finance team. There'll be a treasury manager, and that transition it's not easy, because it then links back to systems, it links back to other stakeholders. But you need someone who says, well, I can transition that model into an internal usage. I mean, we typically facilitate that in a similar way that you do, which is we can do that work while training people. So we get people up to speed and say, now are you comfortable? Now you can come to us for, I suppose, discussions and support. But we need to transfer the ownership at some point so that you can do this quick. As an external provider of financial modeling services, it's much harder to have that in-depth understanding rapidly about your metrics and your market and what you want to do. Yeah. You know, when the CEO says, it's 10 p.m. Friday night, and suddenly says, I was thinking about this thing. Can we do it this way? Can we restructure the business? Ideally, it's not Friday night, 10 p.m. But
they just call me. They just call me, and I'd answer the phone, and I'd get it.
But that transition, as you say, it's incredibly important to understand how it links together. I suppose that's sort of, in a way, brings us to the third parameter, which is around accuracy. So basically saying, how close to a projected reality do we need to be? If I take the broad examples, if you look at, say, let's say a private equity buyout, we have a closed fund, it's 7-year duration. We want to make sure that the exit value in year 7, that's our ultimate driver. What happens along the way there? Plus minus a bit, doesn't matter so much. We're raising cash now to get things going, and we want to sell this at a premium in 7 years. All right, that's the complete opposite to say someone who says, well, I'm running this asset. It's a I don't know, it's a group of car wash cafes in Sydney, and I want to know week by week how much cash we're going to have in the bank. Okay, these two purposes do not mix in the same model. But if you've got a private equity buyout case, for example, or a bank model for your car wash cafes, you may need to have two different models so that we can, you can serve different purposes. But, the bank or the private equity party, they don't know if you're going to pay your electricity bill on Thursday this week or Friday next week. They don't care. But you still need both, right? But if you try to do it in the same model, you end up often with a monster. I think mining is the clearest example of this, where you see operation models being separated from bank and finance models. And they have to be. When they're not, no one gets particularly happy, because you get this conversion of, I need 30 kilos of nitrate in this step of the process so that I can do whatever with my ore. And the banks go, what's your yield again? How about that number? Can we just get one nice high-level number that's sufficient? And as long as it's backed up by engineers, we're good here. But we don't want to bring it in. So being honest about your accuracy, if you need it to the dollar, like in a treasury sense, where if your model doesn't match your bank account, well, you're in trouble, because somewhere money's gone missing, right? So it's a difficult question to answer, because you can't put a number on it and you don't know which metric you're going to use. So it becomes quite a fluffy definition.
And the materiality is such a huge issue in a model. Mm-hmm. Like, just, as they say, that your model's wrong. It's just, how wrong. And I think it can be a little bit misleading sometimes when you say, oh, we're going to make this much, blah, 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 blah. And then you state the number down to the 2 decimal places. And it kind of makes the user think that you know what you're talking about.
That's right.
That you have this inflated sense of trust in the model, when in fact, you just Tesla multiplied by 10. It's just a ballpark. Sorry, by 20, didn't you say?
Yeah, that's right. And look, that's a really good question in the chat, which relates to these two first companies, which is, so
actually, can I just mention, for those of you who are on Zoom and using the chat, can you make sure that you address all of your comments to everyone? Because if it's all panelists, Rickard and I are the only people who can see it, and we are talking, probably not so likely to be able to respond. So please address it to everyone.
Yeah. One question was, I'll broaden it a little bit, but it touches on the topic. What if you have smaller models feeding into a larger model, say in mining? To be honest, if it's mining or not, it doesn't matter, right? Where it gets interesting is that, sure, you can do that and you can make it work well, but these considerations that we're going through needs to be addressed then in each model or each spreadsheet. Who's going to be using which one, who can control it, and therefore, to answer the question at the top level, who's got control of the top level model that then feeds in from others? Well, that could be quite a long story, because someone may say, I don't know where this information is coming from. We had quite a scary, I suppose, a bit of a, not the most inspiring story for the person who experienced it, but I shared it anyway, which was, I worked on a project a few years ago, and the end model was basically one of these feeder models. And we worked with a person to improve it, and we talked about where it was going. And then the result was we save it in this location for other teams to pick it up, right? So it was feeding into other models. And we're like, okay, all right. And this was a proven model. It's been going for years. And we said, so who picks it up? Where does it feed? The answer was, we don't really know. Okay. So they spent a huge amount of time trying to work out if anyone was actually using this model. And the reality was, we couldn't find, it's difficult to find out the other way. So in the end, we said, just don't put it there. Don't save it there. And you wait until someone says it's missing. And no one ever said it was missing, right? It's awful. I felt for the guy who said, well, clearly that was a waste of time. But it's a good point that highlights that it's not that easy. And you often see this I've done a lot of work with banks as well, and you see spreadsheets on servers that are incredibly interconnected, which is dangerous. And we would talk about, I suppose spreadsheet risk in an ecosystem is a bigger topic, but it gets scary, because you get a number and you can't explain where that's come from. It may be right, but it may also not be right. And that's when things start getting a bit,
We've got an interesting question in the Q&A from Shashank. Is it correct to assume that there's no single template to tackle the vastly different assumptions for different industries when laying out the historicals in order to build a base for a 3-statement pro forma forecast? I would say that it is correct to assume. Do you agree, Rickard?
Yeah, look, that was the easiest question I've ever been asked. That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
That's just outright impossible to say that there would be a standard way of doing things. I mean, what you see sometimes, when we look at, I suppose, templates in audience, what we didn't include in that category of list is what we call, where you see the, I suppose, more template-driven assumptions would be in the world of LBOs, so leveraged buyouts. Those models within banks and finance houses would typically be quite standardized, but they often ignore the operational part of a model. So they would have things like EBITDA, debt, growth rates. And you could say, well, that's standardized and it gives a base for something, but it hasn't actually modeled the business, right? We're taking another business model to feed into this one so that we can do the LBO layering on top. That's different. I wouldn't call that a standardized model. Well, it's a standardized model, but it's not a business model. It's an LBO overlay.
It's just the structure. Yes, the structure. Like, yes, there will always be certain pieces that need to be there, but the operational model that sits behind it is going to be completely different.
And look, we see that this quite clearly in the, I suppose, in the valuation landscape. Again, I got a real thing about, is valuation models a thing? Whereas in my view, no, it's not. You need to start with one of those categories first to build a business, and then you add on a valuation overlay. And of course, if you got 200 assets all over the world in a fund or something, you want the valuation methodology for all of those assets to be identical so that you can compare. I mean, that's not the thing. That's not the way it's done in the world, which is scary, because two operational models, even if you take them identical, you copy one, put it in, and you have two different valuation overlays, you're going to get different values for the identical asset, right? So that's a big thing. I'm a huge proponent for separating potentially the operational calculations, but never the valuation methodology. It needs to produce, same asset needs to produce the same valuation, regardless of which individual or which team is performing the valuation. Otherwise,
people often ask for a valuation model, and what they mean is that valuation piece that goes at the end. A valuation model could be anything. It's really just that add-on, sort of bolt-on over the top that is really what a valuation model is. There's a question here from Hadia. Do you want to tackle that? Are you able to see that, Rickard?
Yeah, I'm trying. Is it in the chat, on the Q&A?
It's in the Q&A.
Oh, yeah, okay. Pre-financial close and post-financial close, blah, 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 greenfield. So this is product finance world, which means we've taken out a lot of these assumptions. So we're talking about driver-based financial models. So basically, do you recommend rebuilding a financial model from scratch after financial close? Or should you basically tweak the one you've got? Look, it very much depends. There's a follow-on thing there, but I think it relates to the first piece. Basically, the question is, you build a model to get a deal done. Now the deal's done, what do you do then? The reality is that a lot of people say, ooh, sounds like a big job to turn this into something that's fit for purpose. I'm just going to hack it and sort of get away with it. Look, sometimes that's, with other considerations, that may be the right thing to do. But what's important is to go back and say, who are we trying to please here? And what information do they need? We're seeing a huge adoption of, I suppose, the rebuild case, or at least take a step back and plan for who we need to please going forward. So a consideration of where things need to be. So, for example, in my view, you need to have what I would say is an operational model with actual functionality that's linked to a system. So that the deal's done, I can now import my financial statements from the software package that I've got, and then do my projections from there onwards. If you don't have that, you get this gap between your financial model, your projecting financial model, the starting point of that one, and the gap is between then what's produced by the finance team. So it's unnecessary tension. We have known information in any organization, that is what has happened to date, or at least until the end of last month. Any projection needs to start there. Does this need you need to rebuild the whole thing? Well, if you're doing like a PFI in the UK, which is a ridiculously standardized process, and things are done in very similar ways, well, no, you don't need to rebuild the whole thing. You can adapt what you've got to capture this new functionality for a different audience. That may or may not be the right model that you want to do if you're going to sell the asset 6 months or 6 years later, or do refinancing or merge two entities or put them together in fund. That may be a different model. So it's not as easy as saying, should I rebuild it after financial close? The answer is, well, you need to look at who do you need to please and bring it back to these fundamental questions that we've asked. So I guess, as always, it depends.
Of course, of course. There's another good question there from David. Are you able to see that one, Rickard, about master models that have components, and parts and pieces of the model? Yeah, I don't know if it's a question or more of a comment. If you'd like to comment on that, Rickard.
Yeah, look, there's a few hidden messages. The question is really, if you've got a master model, it's got subcomponents and it's got various modules and metrics, etc. Like, what are you going to do, and how does that relate to other parts of it? I may be spreading this out a little bit, but in terms of making sure that things are right, I mean, my view is that if you're not in full ownership, let's say you're doing a long-term projection of a model, a long-term projection models, which is different to like a treasury model or an FP&A model. You need to be able to justify and understand the big outcomes of a model. So, for example, your valuation in year 12 or whatever you're looking for, and that typically means you run in parallel to the big model that may have feeder models and it may have different modules and various authors. You need to have something separate to that, which you're in full control of. You know everything in line. It's really simple. And then the headline numbers align with the scary one, so that you can at least say, as long as they're projecting similar high level numbers, this will be my biggest sanity check, right? If you can't produce this simple model, this other one is really dangerous. And I see that's the biggest difference with experienced business operators who say, like, to get to a high level valuation of my business or a financing case or whatever I'm doing, I only need like 100 rows. And should you call that a model? Well, you don't need to call that a model. It's a simplified spreadsheet that's got some pluses and minuses and multiplication and division in it. And then you get to an outcome. You can hard code any line in there that you want, as long as you're 100% confident of every cell and every assumption in there, and it aligns with the other one. This is what brings back when we had this, was another client case of a European oil and gas developer that we were working on, and we had two teams. We had the economics and planning team, basically investments team, and then we have a strategy team. They had a difference in valuations of $1 billion of their assets. So, it's not exactly a small change. A lot of investigation was happening, what was going on, and in the end, the answer was that the strategy team had a different forward curve on oil prices than the planning team. Well, of course, that's going to be a problem. So sometimes you need to bring it back. It's not just the models that need to be aligned and done in a methodological way. You also may need to agree within an organization, which are our key assumptions. If you're in oil and gas business, there has to be one place where say, this is the oil price that everyone needs to use, or these are the scenarios that are used for all investments. Otherwise, you're not comparing apples and apples.
No, it sounds simple, right? So easy to do. You see it all the time, where you just have things not aligned, and it's the more complex it becomes, the harder it is to flush out those kind of issues.
Look, FX would be probably the classic case where you can see models, people using different FX rates. And basically, with those assumptions from different departments, you can build this, money spinning arbitrage model, which has got no connection to reality whatsoever. You're just moving money around using inaccurate FX rates, and you're creating money out of thin air. So, having this, basically setting the owners of key assumptions, it's absolutely fundamental. I see it in every business, everything from cement factories to agriculture to gold mining. Just choose a place of truth and who's responsible for that, and say that all assumptions need to be linked to this. Let's call it the assumptions feeder model, if you like. But people can't copy, you can't hard code, because sooner or later those assumptions age, and then there's this disconnect, and you might prioritize a bad project over a good project because you haven't had the discipline of reviewing assumptions. And this is across all of these models that we're talking about. I think it's equally important to, especially if you've got lots of models in an organization, to present as it's incredibly important, of course, to present the outputs of the model. But it is equally important to present the key assumptions going in, so that someone can look at it.
It's only as good as the assumptions that go into it.
That's right. But often you can make an assumption drive a good outcome, right? And people do this, whether they want it or not. Yeah. They change numbers, they change discount rates because, this is not so risky, and I don't think we're going to have any bad debt issues, and I think gold price is going to go up in my particular case. But it's basically jumping the line, like cheating in the priority queue, and that internally. So your decision-making process is just thrown out the window, and you're down to someone looking to get their project prioritized. It's a dangerous place to be, that optimism.
Yeah, absolutely. So with all these kind of issues that you've described, where these errors, I suppose, or problems with the whole financial modeling process, what do you see as the key risk? If people make these mistakes or use the wrong type of model or the wrong type of drivers, what's the worst that can happen? What's really at stake here? What do you think?
We look at these various dimensions. I mean, one thing that we covered already in a previous segment was basically bad decisions are made. Ultimately, that's what it boils down to. So your corporate strategy is not aligned. Your decisions are not aligned to your corporate strategy because you have misinformed decisions, right? That's the peak of problems, that you just don't know what you're doing. Under there's a million things. The classic one would be just frustration. Now, that's often when these things comes out. So you see this frustration in the person trying to please people with a tool that's not fit for the audience, right? And therefore, the receiving party gets even more frustrated and go, clearly that guy's an idiot because what they're sending me is not what I need. All right. But I'm also trying to use this tool to please them. And therefore, I introduce this new functionality. And then someone's just scrambling to keep this model alive. And usually, and this is where I have a personal, I suppose, a soft spot, that suffering often happens at quite a junior end of a career, when you're trying to do something which someone else should have been responsible enough to say, well, that's just not going to work, is it? We may need to separate these two tasks or these two models so that you're happy, or at least get them to sit in the same room and they have the argument. Like, don't go via me just because I happen to be new in my job and been given a model that was rubbish in the first place. So I'd like to lift that up to say, well, let's take the frustration out and be honest about who am I trying to please here, and with what tools. And if I'm a huge proponent of writing these things down. I'm going to build a model. Let's write down who's it for, what are the objectives, what's the timeline, what's the level of accuracy, who can change it, who's allowed to watch it, should be sent internally, does it have any confidential information, what's the timing frequency, what's the decision period, and the list goes on, right? But you can say, I don't have time to do that. Well, it's going to cost later on. You're going to spend a lot of late nights going, it's a bit silly. Or, what's more common is that you write this list and then you show it to someone else, which is an important step. They're going to go, well, that's quite a big list. I don't think that's going to work. If someone says that, they're probably right. Because
what would not work?
There's the specification list, if you like, the shopping list of what you want this model to do.
Okay.
Because you get the CFO go, I want a high level strategy model across our global business. I can just tweak some, run some scenarios across our global billion-dollar portfolio of a conglomerate on interest rate changes. Okay, I can understand why you want to do that. That's important. But you try and do that in a short-term treasury model, well, that's not going to work as well. And then, so I think once you write it down, if the list becomes too long or too complex, share it with someone else, maybe from maybe someone external, maybe someone else in different departments. Say, does this sound feasible? Someone put in the chat, like, you pay now or you pay later. Being honest about these limitations up front is going to save you a lot of pain. And we both, we're in the business of training up and coming, not just up and coming, but many up and coming financial modelers. They're amazing at Excel. They've gone to the best business schools. They've got ambitions. They can do anything, and they will say yes. It's very dangerous to say yes in a career of financial modeling. You can say yes sometimes, but yes, but is probably a better way of phrasing it. Or you say, yes, I can do all of this, and you build a monster, and then you feel silly because you know that you shouldn't have done that. And often I see so many people depart good jobs where they actually fit in because there's a level of shame and there's a level of, I don't know how to get out of this. I've dug a hole. Maybe it's just easy to go somewhere else. And we don't see these models and this situation repaired until the senior person is then replaced and someone else comes in and go, that's a mess. I have no stake in this, so let's just sort this thing out. That's usually the required step. But I think where we are today, I think I'd like to see more people to say, all right, we did what we thought was right. That's clearly wrong. We have to reinvest and do this another way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Ron asks, how do you feel about including the assumptions or specs in the spreadsheet itself? I think yes, definitely. I think as much documentation as you.
Absolutely.
The spreadsheet is the place to do it, and there's no point in doing a beautiful briefing document that doesn't go together with the file itself. It's the best place to do it. Dali says scope creep, which is a common problem.
That's right. Yeah, and look, I think scope creep, there's different ways of looking at scope creep. It's a nasty word, which basically is you've been asked to do something and then it extends a little bit. That could be perfectly fine. But I think in my view, it's quite important to look at a change in the brief, if we call it that, and then link it back to these, does it change the audience? Does it change the purpose? Does it change the, who's going to be working with this model? Or anything or that, and say, well, if it changes any of those parameters, it's just not a can you just, right? Suddenly it's a big fundamental change that needs to have a different consideration, because you can break
just need you to just tweak just a couple of things. It's really, really straightforward. Not straightforward enough for me to do myself, but I'm sure it won't take you very long at all.
Yeah. We've all heard it.
Yes.
Look, sometimes it's true, but having that list up front, so that you bring it back to that document, then it certainly it can certainly make a difference. Look, just want to make sure we cover off the fourth part, and then we can cover off some more questions here if you like. One fundamental thing is, and this is where we see very different approaches in different categories or subcategories of financial modeling. And the question is your model, are your projections going to be based on your financial statements to date? Or are you going to use driver-based assumptions? So, for example, what you see in some parts of modeling, you might say, please show me your financial statements and I'll apply growth rates and how they interact. Like I might model margin going forward, for example. Margin improvement, what's that mean in the cash position, for example, right? It's absolutely right to do in certain parts. In certain examples of modeling. In other places, you need to go. A simple example, like for example, all right, your revenue in where are we? April. Your revenue in March was $100. What is going to be in April? All right, you can choose. I can say, well, my revenue is going to be grown by 1%, so it's going to be $101. Or a driver-based approach would be, but you need to say, are you going to sell more items? Or you're changing the price. And that already we're only one step in, but they have fundamentally different ways of achieving that. If you say, well, I'm going to decrease the price, but increase the volume slightly more, well, you might have operational impacts, right? Like everyone gets this, but just thinking it through, and that's when it gets important then to say, well, if you're going to track actuals going forward, are you happy to track just your revenue assumption or your financial statements assumptions? Or do you actually need to bring it down to what drives your business, like units sold, for example, or hours spent in the factory, or shoes delivered?
How much detail is it necessary to go into? And it really depends on the situation and the amount of time that you have.
Yeah. And this is where we see different people in the same organization will have different views on how this should be done. Right. I mean, we had a classic case. I worked on a project in Guatemala a few years ago where it was a pan-Latin American agricultural business, and they tried to get driver-based assumptions from the farmers working on various plantations all over Latin America. And they were pretty unsophisticated farmers, not like industrial farmers. They were very unsophisticated farmers, and they couldn't say how much they're going to spend on this. They would say, I need 3 truckloads of soy. Okay. All right. And what is that going to achieve in outputs? Well, it depends on the weather. Yeah. That's fair. I just don't know how to put that into my model for the valuation for next year for the equity holders. So we get this gap, right? If you ask people for information, they are not sophisticated or experienced enough, or maybe it's just right out impossible to do it, then what are you going to do? And you need to then find a way of balancing that out. And in those situations, it may be better to say, look, our total crop is typically around here. Maybe we should just have a high-level estimate on that, because asking each farmer about whether they're going to be lucky with the weather or not, or if the birds are going to come in on their field and or grasshoppers or whatever, they don't know.
And I think that goes back to your first point about the sophisticated or the purpose of the model, like who's the model for, who's going to be using it.
That's right.
For those farmers who are going to be using it, then it's perhaps not appropriate to try to get down to that amount of level.
Yeah. Look, one thing that's this comes up every now and then. We had a chat about it before, Danielle, is this concept of what you can do with a financial model. And this is typically when we take a step away from I suppose spreadsheets and look at larger models, is the concept of trying to describe a financial model as a city.
Oh yeah, love that idea.
So I wrote an article, and we can include that link in the email that goes out.
You've got to see this article. It came out. It's an oldie but a goodie. It came out ages ago, and some of the it's absolutely hilarious. Some of the descriptions. Like Dubai was promising but didn't quite get there because the financial modeler moved on to a better job. Paris is so romantic, a financial model full of love, of course. So Sydney is beautiful, a beautiful city, but the infrastructure breaks down from time to time. So I'll send out a link to that article.
Look, where that gets important is, I I recognize a few names in the participant list who are people who are basically but either sort of advising other people in their helping them to build models, or consulting within organizations. And it's not that easy to tell someone that your model's rubbish. So it doesn't go down so well. A different way of saying is to describe it as a city. So every city's got something good and something bad. Well, most of them. Yeah. And once you phrase it like that, it might be easier for people to talk about it. I mean, the example we've got, the example that started the whole that article and that discussion was Berlin, when the Berlin Wall was there. It was it one city or two cities? Well, after you remove the wall, you basically had two cities sort of interconnected, but they're so different. So, do assumptions align? Are methodologies the same? No, then just not. And sometimes you see these models where they're built in, you're basically taking two different spreadsheets, whack them together and put some...
just throw them together. Yeah, what could go wrong?
The chances of that working well, they're low.
Yeah.
So we need to work out what that means. And basically looking through it, it looks like from various people I talked to, you want to build a financial model like Geneva. smooth, beautiful,
Yeah,
and efficient.
beautiful.
That seems to be the way to go. I haven't spent enough time in Geneva to find what the hidden problems are. Sure, there's something there. But anyway, that's worth thinking about as a concept of crystallizing these issues that we see sometimes.
Yeah. All right. I think, did that sort of cover off everything that you wanted to chat about, Rickard? It was
Yeah, most of it. Look, I think there's probably one area which is worth. We don't need to go into it in detail, but I really don't think it should be ignored, which is around softwares and tech integration, and where all that's going, because that's I suppose it changes the rules, right? Which accounting package you have, or if you've got business intelligence software, the level of sophistication within your organization, if you've got like a data layer or a data hub and external data integrations, and if you've got, a board who wants to see, integration of market information with spreadsheet simulations, etc., or just strategy simulations, it's a different ball game altogether. The reality is none of the Excel challenges have gone away. We just now got a new integration challenge that needs to be linked up. And sure, some tech players are trying to say, well, let's just build your models in this software. But it doesn't change anything. It's just a new platform for capturing assumptions, doing some business logic, and getting some outputs. So all of the other things remain. In fact, they may get harder. So for example, is your model going to get shared with other people, other organizations? Well, once you go into tech, maybe they need a license. Maybe they need to know how to use it. Maybe they just don't like it. They just want to get a spreadsheet with financial statements. Maybe. We don't know. And who can control it? And do you trust them? Do they need to go on a training course to be able to change the business logic, and without changing for everyone else, or just for themselves? So I don't have a magic pill on solving this. I'll just recommend that everyone to sort of, I suppose, lean in assertively and cautiously at the same time, because we need some of these software. Some of the bits are fantastic and they can really help, but just don't pretend that it means that it solves all of these other parameters. They remain exactly the same, just in a different box.
Henry says the dangers of black boxing. Absolutely. I think we often tend to sort of always think in the confines of Excel. We think of everything in terms of columns and rows, and that's we can sometimes limit ourselves like that. So there's nothing wrong with sketching it out on a whiteboard or on a piece of paper. There's other systems that there's so many other pieces of software out there, and I know that we got the Financial Modelling Innovation Awards coming up again this year, and so I'm sure that we'll see lots and lots of different innovative technologies that are built for specific purposes for the purpose of financial modelling. So I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of things come out there. But as a Microsoft MVP now, of course, I don't like to advocate anything other than the use of Excel, and it's kind of hard to go past it. We do. Excel is just the thing that we all use, and it's hard to get away from using Excel.
Absolutely.
For financial.
Yeah, and look, I think that'll be interesting. I'm very pleased to see us an Excel MVP. It means you've gone from an authority to an official authority, which is a huge step.
Took me a while.
But I think Microsoft, they see this more clearly than anyone. What is the role of Excel in the world of, let's call it, making businesses better? It's not an easy one to solve, because it's just not an easy one to solve. There's just so much data, and there's just so much going on. So, I now see a lot of more companies running on, basically non-Microsoft platforms, still spreadsheets, right? I see them having, maybe I just need to develop myself, but I jump on Google spreadsheets or on Apple Sheets, and it's slow. I'm trying. I'm not flying in that environment, so that is a challenge. But of course it comes with other compatibility issues, compatibility benefits and sharing benefits, and license issues and that sort of thing. So there's a lot. It's just a different way of slicing it, I think.
All right, we might have to leave it there, Rickard. We're pretty much getting over time now. So yeah, we better finish it off. Thank you everybody for joining us here today, and a special thank you to Rickard. That was really interesting. I was very much looking forward to our chat, and you did not disappoint, definitely. So I will send out an email to everybody probably tomorrow now, and I'll include some of those resources that Rickard mentioned, and feel free to send through anything else that you'd like me to include, Rickard, overnight. And yeah, thank you so much, everyone. And
that's right, my pleasure. And look, I think that we share that article on
yes,
on LinkedIn as well. But look, if you got any questions, anyone, feel free to contact me on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest way.
Yeah.
Sometimes if I get enough questions, we sort of bundle those questions into, and then maybe we do a follow-up webinar on those topics. But regardless, feel free to ask anything. I try to share what I know every now and then. So
you sure do. So thank you so much.
That's great. Thank you. And thanks everyone for some of you stayed up late and some of you gone up early. So
yeah. All right.